All right, everyone. In this video, I'll do a review of how sealed bids work with a fairly elementary or small um, example. So what do you need to do for sealed bids? Well, the idea is that you have some players. In this case, we'll label them just by letters A, B, C, and D. And there are a couple of assets that need to be given out um, or distributed to the players. And what each player does is they write down a quick bid for what they think that asset is worth, and you go from there. So the first thing to do if you're handed a problem like this is to find the total value that each player has for the entire estate. So we'll make a third row here and call it total value. And we're just going to add up the values as they're given in the table here. So this is going to be $536,000, and then we'll have $480,000, $330,000, and $440,000. All right. So that's the total value, and then we need to calculate the fair share value. So how do you do that? Well, you look at what the total value is according to whatever player you're dealing with, and you divide by the total number of players, in this case, 4. So we're going to look at 536, divide by 4, and we'll get $134,000. And the idea is if A thinks that the whole estate is worth $536,000, then splitting that up equally amongst 4 players would mean that each player would get 134,000. And similarly for B, dividing by 4, you get 220, $120,000. Dividing by 4 here, we'll have 82,500. And dividing by 4 here, again, we have we have $110,000. So we've calculated the fair share value, and we've calculated the total value. And now we need to see how much in the initial settlement would go to the estate, and how much would stay with the player. And of course, the first thing we really need to do is before we calculate that is to see who wins the various assets. And I say it wins because what I mean is the highest bid will take home the asset in question. So for the house, we're going to see that the highest bid, of course, is the 500,000, bigger than the other bids. And then for the car, well, I look 36, 30, 30, 40,000 is the winner there. So we'll circle that D gets the car. All right, now we can make this, we can find out how much would go to the estate or come from the estate in the initial settlement. So let's say what the items, so we'll make a new table here. Okay. Make a new table, give myself a little bit of room, and I'll say, okay, items received. Okay, I'm going to do items received, but let's put it down, and I'll say, okay, here I've got players A, B, C, and D. A received the house. B did not receive anything, so nothing for B, nothing for C. These are assets received, so items, not the full amount. And then the car goes to D. Okay, great. And then the value received, and the value received, again, this is from their own value system. We use that value. So the house was worth 500,000 to A, so we write $500,000 here. Nothing is worth nothing. and the car is worth 40,000. Right. So now you want to look at the fair share value now to calculate what goes to or from the estate. Okay. So in other words, at this stage, what we're going to calculate is we're going to calculate if, since A received the house and the house is valued at $500,000 for A, and the fair share value for A was calculated to be 134,000. A got a lot more than the fair share. And so what we have to do is we have to say, well, A is going to pay the remaining amount of value of the house to the estate. So it's there. Well, the remaining amount is we'll take 500,000 and we subtract the fair share value of 134,000, and we get the value of $366,000. So that's how much A owes the estate, or will have to pay the estate in the initial settlement. We'll see this gets adjusted in a moment. The other players all are getting less than what their fair share value is. Certainly B and C, they're not receiving any items, and so they deserve their fair share value in total. And so what we'll write there is we'll write, and I'm putting it in red because this is a negative value. In other words, it's coming from the estate, not to the estate. And if you want, you could use a negative sign here. That's fine too, but something to indicate that these players are not giving money, but getting money. And here, player D, they do get something. They get the car, which is 40,000. However, their fair share value is 110,000. So according to their bids, they are entitled to $110,000 worth of value, and they've only gotten 40. So you have to take that difference and say, okay, well, they're owed 70,000. Okay, so they are owed also $70,000. Okay, great. So now what we need to do is we need to calculate and divide up the surplus. So what you can see now, this is the next step of our sealed bids process, is we can say, okay, well, let's suppose this happened, and A gave some money and got the house. D got the car, and the estate paid out a certain amount of money. Well, the estate actually still will have a surplus. And what we can do is you can calculate that if you take the money that the estate received was, so the surplus, how do we calculate the surplus? We look at how much money the estate received, which only one player gave money to the estate, which was A, gave $366,000 to the estate. And then we subtract out how much money was paid to the remaining players, because all of the other players received money from the estate. And when we do this, whether through a calculator or through just arithmetic by hand, we'll see that there's a certain amount of money, which is $93,500. This is the surplus, and it will always be positive, or at least not zero, or at least not negative, pardon me. It could be zero, but it will always be greater than or equal to zero, this surplus. So you have a positive amount of money, and the estate doesn't get to keep anything, sadly. The estate has to pay all of the money back to the players. And so in this case, we take that money, that's surplus, and we divide it by 4. So surplus share. And that number of 93,500 divided by 4 is 23,375. And again, you can use a calculator, just do by hand if you want. So what is that number? That number is going to go, we're going to give each player that amount to kind of give an extra fair distribution of assets. So what happens in the final settlement is we're going to write down the final settlement. Let's do this I kind of do this with sort of a, actually, why don't we do this? I'm gonna copy this whole thing, and I'm gonna just adjust what I have here. Okay, so the items received are the items received, but now I'm going to erase everything that's here, and I'm going to make the final settlement. Okay. The final settlement will be how much cash from a state. So this is how much each player receives. All right, so that the player A received the house, had to pay $366,000 in the initial settlement, but then received their surplus share of $23,375. So they will have to pay the difference, not 36,000, not $366,000 dollars, but rather 366,000 less the surplus share, and that comes to 342,625. So this is just that difference of this and this. Okay, that's how much A will have to pay. The others are all addition, right? Because in the initial settlement, these were the amounts that were being paid to the players, and then they got an additional amount from the surplus. So we just add these two numbers for each of them, and these are all going to be in black because they don't owe anything. They're receiving cash. And so the numbers there, again, just doing the arithmetic, $143,375, 105,875 dollars, and then finally 70 plus this is 93,375. Okay, and so then this is the final settlement. And often, if you're given a homework problem, you may be asked, one or two of these. Somebody say, how much does D get, or what items does D get? How much cash? How much cash did they get in the initial settlement? All of that. So hopefully, working through this problem gave you a better sense as to how this sealed bids process works.